Good evening, everybody, and welcome to this evening's class, which is called the Kabbalah of Sticks and Snakes. This week is Parshas Vaira, and there is a fascinating episode in the Chumash this week, in Revi of the Parsha. Let me just read you through the actual words of the Chumash, and you'll get a flavor for exactly the subject which we're going to discuss tonight. So this is the Parsha of Vaira Revi, chapter 7, verse 8. Vayomer Hashem el Moshe ve'el Aaron lemor. God said to Moshe and to Aaron, saying, Ki yedaber alechem paroi lemor. When Paroi speaks to you, saying, Tnu lachem moifes, prove yourselves with a miracle. Ve'omarta el Aaron. So then you, Moshe, should say to Aaron, Kaches matcha, take your staff, v'hashlech lifnei Faroi yehi lasanin, and cast it in front of Faroi, and it will become a snake. Vayove Moshe v'Aaron el Paroi. So Moshe and Aaron came before Paroi. Vayasuchen. This is exactly what they did. Kashat tziv Hashem, like Hashem commanded them. Vayashlech Aaron es Mateu lifnei Faroi v'lifnei avoda vayihi lasanin. And Aaron threw his staff before Paroi and before his servants, and it became a snake. Vayikra gam Paroi lachachomim v'lamachashvim. So Paroi called also to his wise men, to his magicians. Vayasu gam heim chartumei Mitzrayim v'lahateim came. And the Egyptian magicians did exactly the same thing with their sticks, with their staff. They threw them on the floor and they became snakes. Vayashlichu ish mateu, each one threw their staff down. Vayula saninim, they became snakes. And then an amazing miracle happened. Vayivle mate Aharon es matoisom. And the staff of Aharon swallowed up their staffs. Nevertheless, Paroi's heart became hard, and he didn't listen to Moshe and Aaron, as Hashem had said to them. Hashem had predicted that Paroi's heart was going to get hard and he wasn't going to let the people go so easily. This was the very first moifes, the very first miracle which Moshe and Aaron performed before Paroi. If you think about what's going on over here, Paroi, magic. Egypt was full of magic. It was full of sorcery, full of black magic. When Paroi asked for a miracle and Aaron cast his staff down and it came to a snake, Paroi thought, as they say in England, you're bringing coals to Newcastle. In other words, what are you bringing sorcery to Egypt? Well, this is full of it. My magicians can also do the same. And that's exactly what happened. The magicians of Mitzrayim threw down their staffs and they became snakes. But then the pasuk says like this, Vayivla mate Aaron es matoisom. And the staff of Aharon swallowed their staffs. Now there's a problem in the pasuk, because surely a snake who has a mouth, a snake can open its mouth wide and swallow all the other snakes. But that's not what the pasuk says. The pasuk says that the staff of Aharon swallowed all the others. So there are commentaries that want to say, Ibn Ezra actually says that Aaron's snake actually swallowed the others. Why does it call it a staff? Because originally it was a staff. However, Rashi does not learn like that. Rashi says, Vayivle mata Aaron, me'acha shechoze v'nase mata bola eskolon. Once it had turned back from being a snake into being a staff, then it swallowed all of them. So here you have 2 miracles, 3 miracles, many miracles. You have the miracle of the staff of Aaron turning into a snake. Then you have the fact that it turned back from a snake into a staff. And then you have the miracle that a staff which doesn't have a mouth swallowed all the other staffs, and it didn't become big and fat, it remained a staff. There were many miracles that happened here. The question is, why was this the moifes? Why was this the miracle that, and the very first miracle that Moshe and Aaron performed in front of Paro? Like in everything which we read in the Torah, there's pardes. There's pshat, the simple meaning, remez, the allusion, the drush, the homiletic interpretation, and soid, there's the mystical interpretation. The Alter Rebbe in Torah Oir, in Parshas Vaira, has a beautiful maimah, which was actually said, Shabbos Mevorchim Chodesh Shvat Chof Zayin Teves, and in this maimah he delivers a beautiful interpretation of this according to Chassidus, and it gives an entirely fresh perspective on exactly what was going on over here. And I invite you this evening to come along and join me in this journey through the Maimah of the Alter Rebbe. Let's start off with a Gemara in Pasohin and learn with you a piece of Gemara. The Gemara says like this. This is a Gemara in Pasohin, page 119a. Omer Rebbe Chama bar Chanina. Rebbe Chama bar Chanina said, I apologize. Omer Rav Yehuda Rama Shmuel. Rav Yehuda said in the name of Shmuel, Kol Kesev v'Zov sheba'olam Yosef liktoi v'havia leMitzrayim. Joseph gathered all the silver and gold in the world and brought it to Egypt. Shenamar, as it says, Vayelakit Yosef es kol hakesef hanimtza. And Joseph gathered all the money that was found in the land of Egypt and the land of Canaan. Eli ela shebe'eretz Mitzrayim v'shebe'eretz Canaan. I only know that he gathered all the money that was in the land of Egypt and the land of Canaan. V'shar arotzis minayin. How do I know that he gathered the money that was in the other lands as well? Talmud loymar. The Torah states, V'chol ha'oretz boru Mitzrayim. All the people of the earth came to Egypt to buy provisions in the time of the famine. And when the Israelites went up from Egypt, they took all the money with them. Shenamar, as it says, Vayenatzlu es Mitzrayim. And they emptied Egypt. Rav Asi Omar, Rav Asi says, Asouhu kemetzuda zoi she'em badagam. This teaches that they made Egypt similar to a trap. The word metzuda means a trap that has no grain. Rabbi Shimon ben Lakish Omar, Rabbi Shimon ben Lakish says, Ki metzula she'ein badagim. They made Egypt similar to the depths. Metzula means the depths of the sea, which has no fish. So just like the depths of the sea have no fish because the fish swim near the surface, they're not to be found in the depths, so too, Vayenatzlu means that they made it like a metzula. They made Egypt like the depths of the sea that have no fish. In other words, they completely emptied out Egypt of all the money. This is what the Gemara says in Pasohin. Comes along the Alter Rebbe and gives an amazingly beautiful, deeper interpretation to this parsha. And he says the following. What does it mean that they emptied out Egypt of all the money? Kabbalistically, we know. What is the genesis of evil? How did evil form from the Godhead? The Arizal in Parshas Vayishlach at the end explains, there's a fascinating parsha there at the end of Vayishlach, which talks about the 7 kings of Edom, the reigning of the kings. Each king reigned and died, another king reigned and died, and so on. 7 kings who reigned and died. We've spoken in previous classes that in fact what is being alluded to here, according to the Arizal, is the whole process of Shaviras HaKelim, the breakage of the vessels. In other words, before God created this world, there was a previous world, not a physical realm, but a spiritual realm. The previous realm was called the world of Tohu, the world of chaos. This world is called the world of Tikkun, the world of rectification. The difference between the worlds of Tohu and Tikkun are, and we've explained this in previous classes, so I'm just saying it now in short, is that in the world of Tohu, there were Oires Merubim, there were tremendous, infinite lights, but Kalim Muatim, very small vessels which could receive the light. And what happened was, each of the vessels in the world of Tohu were not prepared to be inclusive of the others. And because of that, they egotistically wanted all the infinite light for themselves. And of course, being too flimsy to receive the light, they shattered. And this caused sparks to fly, rather like 1,000,000 volts going through a light bulb. Too much energy, and the vessels shattered. And this is explained by the Arizal, the idea of the 7 kings of Edom who reigned and died before there reigned a king in Israel. The king in Israel who reigned, that's the realm of Tohu, that's the realm of Tikkun, the realm of the rectification, which in the next world, in the world of Tikkun, you have Oires Muatim, you have much less intensity in the light, and Kalim Rachavim, and very broad vessels, which are inclusive of each other. So it's explained in Chassidus that the root of evil is rooted in the egocentric nature of the Kalim, of the vessels in the world of Tohu. Because they were not inclusive, they were exclusive, therefore they shattered. And as these sparks fell down into the worlds, down, if you want, the chain order of creation, what happened is that they became crass. And these sparks of holiness became covered and encrusted in shells, which we call klippa. Just like the shell and peel of a fruit is called a klippa to the fruit, so too the sparks of holiness, which originated in the world of Tohu, became encrusted and covered by these shells, by these klippas. Let me give you a mashal, a parable to that, says the Alter Rebbe. Imagine the soul before it comes down to this world. The soul before it comes down to this world is basking in the divine light, in a higher world. And there, the soul is completely nullified. It's cognizant of the divine. It doesn't have any existence for itself. It's like a servant before a king. It's completely nullified. It's like standing by the Amida. It has no being for itself. It's just magnificently aware of the Creator. But when the soul comes down to this world, as it descends in various levels, but eventually becoming clothed in a physical body. And the material nature of the body darkens, conceals, opaques the pristine, shining light of the soul. And what happens is that it becomes an independent entity, a being that somewhat has to, if you want, understand God from a distance, and at times closes it off. Now, in its extreme, as the clippers form and get harder and stronger, the extreme is the creation of an entity called Paroi. In fact, there is in everything an element of holiness and unholiness. God made opposites in the world. There is an element of Paroi in the holy realm, and there's an element of Paroi in the unholy realm. In fact, the word Paroi can come from the word Paria. Paria means revealing, because Paroi in the realm of holiness is a level where everything is revealed. It's the highest level of holiness. However, as Paroi's sparks in the Shvira Sakelim, in the breakage of the vessels, descend below, they become encrusted and covered in klippa, so much so that in the extreme, because the highest falls the lowest, Paroi, the man, the Pharaoh in Egypt, says, Li oiri va'ani asisini. This river Nile, I made it. It belongs to me. Now, we all know that the river Nile in Egypt, there's little rain in Egypt. It's the Nile that irrigates everything. That's why the Nile used to be the god of Egypt. And in fact, the Pharaoh said, Li oiri, it belongs to me. I made the Nile. In other words, he was the greatest, if you want, anti-God. Paro said, Lo yodati et Hashem. I don't recognize or know God. In fact, the root of the word paroi, we said beforehand that it was from the word priya, meaning revealed, but it can also come from the word oiref, which means the neck, because Paro turned his back on God. He denied the existence of God. That's the greatest and strongest klippa. Now, in order to reveal the spark of holiness that is within Egypt, that was in Paro, it's necessary to break the klippa. So imagine a nut with a shell. In order to release the fruit within the nut, it's necessary to smash the shell, to break the klippa in order to reveal the fruit that is within. Let's now learn a different verse, a verse in Bereshis. In the discussion in the Garden of Eden, it says the following. It says, these are the products of heaven and the earth when they were created. And then it says, talks about the Garden of Eden, and it says, V'nohar yotze me'Eden. A river went out of Eden, lahashkos es hagon, to water the garden. Umisham yiparet. And from there, it divided. V'hoya la'arba roshim, and it became into 4 waters, 4 rivers. Shema echad Pishon. The first is Pishon. Hu haseviv es kol eretz hachavilo asher shama zohav. The one that encircles the whole land of Chavila, where the gold is. That is identified with the river Nile. It says the name of the second river was Gichon, which runs around the whole of the land of Cush. The third river was called Hidekel, and the fourth was called the Paras, the Euphrates, the Tigris and the Euphrates. 4 rivers that went out. It was the river that went out of Eden in order to water the garden, and when it got to the garden, it divided into 4. That's what it says in Bereshis. explains the Alter Rebbe like this. What is this river that goes out of Eden? Eden is identified with the highest sephira in the world of Atzilus. Atzilus is the highest world, the world of emanation, the world in which everything is godliness. It's just that in the world of Atzilus are manifest God's spheres, his attributes. So in the world of Atzilus, you have Chochmah of Atzilus, the wisdom of Atzilus, Bina, the understanding of Atzilus, the Das of Atzilus, the Chesed, Gvura, Tiferes, all the 10 spheres. And Eden is the idea of Tainug, of pleasure, which is in the highest sphera in Chochmah. So in fact, Eden refers to Chochmah of Atzilus, something we refer to as Chochmah Iloah, supernal Chochmah. V'nohar, and a river went out of Eden, lahashkois es hagon, to water the garden. What is the Gan? What does the garden refer to? This is the sphere of Malchus of Atzilus, the lowest sephira in Atzilus. So the entire flow from Chachma of Atzilus down through the spheres into Malchus of Atzilus, and of course Malchus is the receptacle which receives the flow from all the higher sephiros. This is called the Nohar, the river that goes out of Eden, lahashkois, to water the Gan, the river, the garden. And where is this garden? This garden is the sphere of Malchus of Atzilus. Umisham yipared. Now we know that from the sphere of Malchus of Atzilus, Ragleha Yerdes, the feet of the Sephira of Malchus descend into the worlds of Bria, Yetzira, and Asiya. In fact, in the world of Atzilus, Kuloi Eloikos, everything is godliness. In the world of Bria, you have the very first and the beginning of Yesh Me'ayin, of something from nothing. The word Bria itself, Bereshis bara, means, and God created. Creation means that there is something that exists. Where does it come from? It comes from the ayin, it comes from the nothing. That's the word Bria. So as soon as you get over the transformation from Malchus and you go down into the world of Bria, Yisham Yipared, you go into the world of Pirud, of diversity, initially into 4 rivers, each of which has different length and quality. Some rivers have sweet water, others are salt, some are longer than the others. The flow, which we're talking about over here, is the godly light that descends into the lower worlds. And as it descends, it becomes opaque. And the sparks of holiness which descend into these worlds become, as we mentioned beforehand, covered in klipa, in shells. Now, in the first river, in the river of the Pasohin, in that river, that was the river Nile, the Nilus. And in that river, that's the, if you want, spiritual flow that came down to Egypt. The word Mitzrayim comes from the word Meitzorim Ugvulim, limitations and borders. And what happened was a large number of sparks of holiness became caught in this land called Mitzrayim. In fact, we're taught that in all together there are 288 sparks that fell in the Shefira Sakelim, Reish Pei Ches Nitzutzes, and 202 of them, Reish Beis Nitzutzes, fell in Egypt. This is actually the meaning of the words Ve'erev Rav Ola Iton, that the Jews took out The Erev Rav, the mixed multitude, Rav is begimatria numerically 202. Now we can go back to the Gemara in Pasohin. What does it mean that they made it kimutzula she'ein ba dagim, like a depth which has no fish? Because when we say that the Jews took all the wealth out of Egypt, it's not just that they took the monetary wealth. What it means is that they elevated from Egypt all the sparks of holiness that had fallen in Egypt. And it was empty of any more sparks of holiness. In other words, the birur, the refinement that needed to take place in that time had been accomplished. Now, in order to accomplish that, it's necessary to take paroi, to take the neck that turns on God and turn it around. And really, that's the whole idea of the Eser Makos, of the 10 plagues. This was a systematic crushing of the ego of Paroi, so that slowly but surely, he and his people should come to the recognition, V'yoda'u Mitzrayim ki ani Hashem, that the Egyptians should know that I am Hashem. It's interesting that by the Yamsuf, by the splitting of the sea, that expression is used, that the V'yodu Mitzrayim, that the Egyptians should know Ki ani Hashem. What is difficult to understand is that all the Egyptians were drowned by the Yamsuf. So in what way did they know that Hashem is Hashem if they were all killed by the Yamsuf? There's an interesting verse in Shoftim, in chapter 8. In chapter 8, verse 16, a story about Gideon and the men of Sukkos. You can look it up. Chapter 8, verse 16. There's a story there about the men of Sukkos not wanting to feed Gideon and his army whilst they were on their way to battle. And it says that Gideon punished them. And the pasuk says, Vayoida bohem es anshe Sukkos. Now the word Vayoida over here means he broke them, he thrashed them. It's interesting, therefore, that V'yoda'u Mitzrayim can be translated not only that the Egyptians should know, but it can be translated V'yoda'u Mitzrayim, and Egypt should be broken. The shell, the casing, the nut around the fruit should be broken, and then Mitzrayim, what's inside, the holy spark which is in, should recognize Ki ani Hashem. That was the whole point of the breaking of the Egyptians. Sus v'roichvoi Rama vayam. A horse and its rider was drowned in the sea. The rider over here is the klippa. The klippa rides. And you've got to get rid of the rider, the markaves paroi, the chariot of paroi, what paroi rides on. Because ultimately, klippa has its source in kedusha, in holiness. And this is where we are all leading to in understanding that the very first miracle that Moshe and Aaron did when they went before Paroi was to throw down the staff and it should change into a snake. What is a matter, a staff? The word matter is the idea of hamshacha, drawing down. It's straight. And hatoya, and bending down or turning to the side. Same idea is mentioned in the idea of a shevet. A shevet is also, it means a tribe, but it also means a staff, like a koichva deshavit, a shooting star. It goes straight. It's brought down. The whole of Seder Hishtalshelus, the whole chain order of creation, is called a matter, is called a staff. A tannin, which is a snake, is the source of all klippas. The matter is a staff which represents the whole of chain order of creation, which eventually the lowest sparks get encased within a klippa, and the greatest klippa is the tannin, the snake. Now we understand why Hashem tells Moshe ve'Aaron, go to Paro. Who is this Paro? This is the man that says, Li yo'ori vani asisini. Mine is the river, I made it. The greatest anti-God, the man who turns his neck on God, the greatest klippa, the Tanin Hagodl, the great snake. And Moshe and Aaron go to him, and Hashem says, take the staff and throw it down so that it should become a snake. In other words, give Paroi the message. You, Paroi, are not an independent being. You don't exist independently of God. Klippa and all of its existence only exists because it derives ultimately its nourishment from Kedusha, from holiness, albeit from the back of holiness, from the Achoraim, and albeit in an extremely condensed and contracted manner, but nevertheless, ultimately, Klippa does not have any metzius, any being, any establishment for itself. It is only there as a result of a contracted form and a concealed form of Kedusha. So ultimately, Moshe and Aaron, when they cast the staff, the matter down, it turns into a snake. They're showing Paro, you only exist because of the flow down the chain order of creation, which ultimately results in chayas, energy being given even to Klippa. So what happens? Paro says, I can do that as well. That's not a big deal. My magicians can also make their staffs into snakes. Then what happens? Vayivla mate aroines matoisa. And we asked beforehand, surely it should say that the snake of Aaron swallowed their snakes. And the Ibn Ezra says that's what happened. But Rashi, as we pointed out, disagrees. Rashi says that after the snake had turned back into a staff, then it swallowed the snakes, the staffs. Why? Because what we're saying over here is that Moshe and Aaron changed the snake back into a staff. In other words, they reduced and nullified the klippa by a revelation of the staff, and that staff swallowed up all the other staffs, all the Charatumim Mitzrayim, all the klippa of Mitzrayim was swallowed up by the staff of Moshe and Aaron, because ultimately klippa does not have any existence in and of itself. It only exists because of nourishment, which is provided to it through the Seder Hishtalshelus, through the order of creation, which goes down and gives some life to this klippa. But when the klippa is broken, when the shell of the nut is smashed, what happens is the holy spark within is released. Now, ultimately, Paroi himself comes to recognize that. In fact, by the Yamsuf, there are two opinions as to what happened with Paroi himself. One was he himself was drowned. The other opinion was he was the only one that escaped, and he went to Nineveh, and it was to him that Yonah, the prophet, was sent, and he caused all the people to do teshuvah. In other words, Paroi was elevated to his original source of ispiriun kol nahorin, of the greatest revelation. In other words, he made a complete turnaround. There was a complete teshuvah. This is how the Alter Rebbe learns this passage in the Chumash. What a magnificent presentation, in the sense that when we see the world, we see sometimes extremely powerful forces of evil, of klippa. We can even see it within ourselves. But what we need to know is that klippa does not have any metzius, any existence in and of itself. It's only there because it's nourished from kedusha, from holiness, and the more we increase in holiness, the more we increase in kedusha, the klippa itself becomes bottled. We need to break the klippa. Sometimes the klippa needs breaking by suppression, breaking, shavira, and sometimes by transformation. Whichever way we do it, whether it's through iskafia, suppression, or ishapcha, or transformation, the fact is, what we need to know is that the klippa itself doesn't have any self-identity. It is quite simply placed there by Hashem to create for us an arena of challenge, so that there can be schar v'onesh, reward and punishment, so that we can refine the world by making a dirub lo yisbarach b'tachtonim, taking the tachton, she'ein tachton lemata mimenu, taking the lowest of sparks and elevating them. And this is the changing of the staff to the snake, the recognition that the snake ultimately comes from the staff, and then it will be the staff that can swallow all the snakes up. In other words, when we go with the power of Moshe and Aaron, when we go with the power of the Rebbe, who is the Nasi Hador, the Moshe Rabbeinu of the generation, when we go with the power with the Moshe Rabbeinu, which is in every single one of us, as the Alter Rebbe explains in Tanya, that there is a nitzutz of Moshe, there's a spark of Moshe within each one of us. When we reveal that stuff, when we reveal the holiness, the kedusha, through engagement in Torah and in mitzvahs, then automatically the klippa is nisbatel, becomes nullified. So if we were looking for a way to get out of Egypt and to turn around Paroi, the Yodu Mitzrayim, breaking Mitzrayim, and Mitzrayim knowing Ki Ani Hashem, this is with the staff of Moshe and Aaron. This is going with the holiness and the kedusha which Moshe and Aaron bring in the Torah HaKadosha, in the Holy Torah. With that power, it's possible to transform the Mitzrayim within and the Mitzrayim in the world. Hashem should help each one of us that we should have access to that staff of Moshe and Aaron, upon which was written the Tzach Hadash Ba'achav, the Makos of Mitzrayim, the transformation of Mitzrayim, which is a prelude to the receiving of the Torah of Mashiach Tzidkenu, when Mashiach should come and Torah Chadashim Tetzei, when we'll hear further beautiful explanations in Chassidus from Mashiach himself, from all the Rabbeim. It should happen Tekev Umiyad Mamash.
Thank you, Rabbi Dubov. As always, inspiring and brilliant. We truly appreciate it. To all who joined in, thank you so much. Have a great week.